Linda never imagined that love would leave her in ruins. When she met Jack, he was a dreamer with big ideas but no means to make them a reality. They were young, in love, and convinced that together, they could conquer the world. Jack wanted to start his own company, and Linda believed in him more than anyone. She worked tirelessly, 2 jobs, long shifts, and sleepless nights to support his ambitions. The tiny apartment they shared was barely livable, but Linda didn't mind. She would cook meals on a single burner and patch up her old clothes while Jack stayed up late with his notebooks, scribbling plans for his business. Each day brought struggles, yet Linda smiled through it, telling herself it was worth it because she loved him. Jack's business started small but began to grow. He hired a couple of employees, and Linda proudly celebrated his milestones, no matter how modest. She believed that their sacrifices were paving the way to a brighter future. Her hands grew calloused, and her health suffered, but she endured it all with Jack's promise that one day, she would live the life she deserved. "I couldn't have done this without you," Jack often said, holding her hand. His gratitude kept her going, making every sleepless night feel justified. Linda watched his dreams take form and felt her heart swell with pride. Over time, Jack's demeanor began to change. As his business grew, so did his confidence, perhaps too much. He started buying expensive suits and dining with new clients, often leaving Linda alone at home. The man who once whispered sweet promises now brushed her off when she asked for his time. Jack stopped thanking her for her sacrifices and started criticizing her for not improving herself. Linda tried to understand, believing that stress was making him harsh, but deep down, doubts began to creep in. Was this the same man who had held her hand years ago, promising they would always be partners? The final blow came one evening during a dinner party Jack hosted to celebrate his company's 5-year milestone. Linda had worked all day preparing food and decorating their home, eager to support him in front of his colleagues. When the guests arrived, Jack barely acknowledged her. Instead, he introduced her as, "My wife, she's just a homemaker." The words stung, but she forced a smile, trying not to let it show. Throughout the night, Jack's friends talked about luxury vacations and ambitious ventures, while Linda sat quietly, feeling invisible in her own home. During the dinner, Jack made an offhand comment that changed everything. "Linda? She doesn't understand business. She's not ambitious like the rest of us." His friends chuckled, and Linda froze. The man she loved had just humiliated her in front of strangers. Her hands trembled as she quietly excused herself from the table. Later that night, Linda confronted him, her voice shaking with disbelief. "How could you say that about me, Jack? After everything I've done for you?" Jack scoffed, dismissing her hurt. "You don't get it, Linda. I've outgrown you. You're holding me back." Those words broke her. Within weeks, Jack filed for divorce. Linda was cast aside like a burden he no longer wanted to carry. The process was swift and cruel. Jack's lawyer, someone Linda had once invited into their home, was relentless, ensuring that she walked away with nothing but a tiny apartment and her dignity in tatters. During their last meeting in the courtroom, Jack smirked at her as if to say, "You're nothing without me." It was then that Linda wrote him a note. She handed it to him, her face calm despite the storm raging inside her. The note read, "You'll need me sooner than you think." Jack laughed aloud, waving the paper dismissively before tearing it in half. After the divorce, Linda found herself standing in an empty apartment with no idea where to start. Her savings were gone, and her confidence was shattered. The walls seemed to close in on her, suffocating her with memories of what she had lost. For days, she stayed in bed, consumed by sadness and anger. But as the weeks passed, something inside her began to shift. She thought about the sacrifices she had made, her late nights, her dedication, her unwavering support, and realized she had been far stronger than she ever gave herself credit for. Jack may have belittled her, but he hadn't broken her. Determined to rebuild her life, Linda applied for jobs relentlessly. Her lack of a formal degree made things difficult, but she was resourceful and hardworking. Eventually, a small design firm hired her as an assistant. The work was demanding, and the pay was minimal, but Linda threw herself into it with everything she had. She stayed late, learned new skills, and quickly earned the respect of her colleagues. Her boss, a kind man named Mr. Hayes, took notice of her dedication. "You remind me of myself when I was younger," he said one evening as she stayed late working on a project. "You're going to go far, Linda." Those words gave her hope. Linda studied finance and management on weekends, determined to improve her skills. Slowly but surely, she rose through the ranks at the company. Her coworkers admired her perseverance and strength. No one saw her as just a homemaker anymore. Linda had transformed herself into a confident, capable professional. She no longer needed validation from anyone, least of all from Jack. Meanwhile, Jack's empire was beginning to crack. His success had inflated his ego, leading him to make risky investments and reckless decisions. He ignored the advice of his financial advisors, certain that his instincts were infallible. Within a few years, his company's profits started to dwindle. Key clients pulled out, citing poor management and unfulfilled promises. Employees began to quit, unable to tolerate Jack's arrogance and disregard for their efforts. Jack refused to see the signs, convinced he could turn things around. The breaking point came when a lawsuit emerged from a failed partnership. Jack's company was sued for breach of contract, and the legal fees began to drain what little reserves he had left. Investors withdrew their support, and creditors circled like vultures. Jack sat in his office, staring at the stacks of bills he couldn't pay. The once celebrated CEO was now a man on the verge of losing everything. His phone calls went unanswered, and former friends turned their backs on him. Jack realized, too late, that he was alone. Desperation drove Jack to seek help. He reached out to business consultants, hoping to salvage what remained of his company. Each time, he was turned away. "Your reputation precedes you," one consultant said bluntly. "No one trusts you anymore." Jack's pride, the very thing that had built his empire, had also destroyed it. Just when he thought things couldn't get worse, his board of directors informed him that they were bringing in an outside consultant to oversee the company's restructuring. Jack had no choice but to agree. On the day of the board meeting, Jack arrived at the conference room looking defeated. He expected to meet another faceless consultant, someone who would dismantle what remained of his company. Instead, when the door opened, his heart stopped. Linda walked into the room, dressed in a sharp business suit and carrying a stack of files. Her calm, confident demeanor was a stark contrast to the woman he had mocked years ago. Jack's face turned pale as Linda took her seat at the head of the table. "Good afternoon," she said, her voice steady. "Let's get started." Jack couldn't believe it. How had Linda ended up here? As she presented her plan to the board, Jack sat silently, unable to meet her gaze. Her proposal was clear and well executed, earning nods of approval from the investors. At the end of the meeting, Linda turned to Jack. "You'll need to step down as CEO for this plan to work," she said calmly. The room fell silent. Jack tried to protest, but his voice faltered. Linda's words echoed in his mind, "You'll need me sooner than you think." Jack signed the papers, officially stepping down from the company he once ruled. Linda never gloated or sought revenge. Instead, she focused on saving the company and restoring trust with its clients and employees. Under her leadership, the company flourished. Jack, now humbled, took a job at a smaller firm where no one knew his name. He often thought about Linda and the note she had handed him, wishing he had treated her differently. Linda, meanwhile, lived a fulfilling life. She had proven to herself and to the world that strength, dignity, and perseverance could overcome even the deepest betrayals. The past no longer haunted her. She had risen above it. Jack sat alone in his modest office, staring blankly at the reports on his desk. Gone were the luxurious leather chairs, the sprawling skyline view, and the bustling team that once buzzed at his command. Now, he shared a cramped workspace with junior staffers, the clatter of keyboards and phones filling the silence he used to command with his presence. This job, entry-level for someone of his former status, was a lifeline offered to him by an old college acquaintance who pitied him. Jack accepted it reluctantly, unable to face the humiliation of unemployment. Every evening, as he drove his aging car home to a plain apartment, Jack's thoughts wandered to Linda. He remembered her face during that last board meeting, calm and resolute, as if the years of suffering had carved out a woman of unshakable strength. Jack couldn't stop hearing those words she'd written years ago, "You'll need me sooner than you think." They haunted him, echoing in his mind like a cruel prophecy. Regret churned in his gut, but it was too late. He had destroyed the one person who had truly believed in him. At night, Jack lay in bed, staring at the cracks in the ceiling. He thought of the dinners Linda had prepared after long days at her jobs, the sacrifices she had made to help him build his empire, and the moments he had dismissed her without a second thought. He once thought her quiet nature was weakness, but now he realized it was her greatest strength. Jack hadn't outgrown Linda, he had failed her. That realization stung more than any of his business failures. Meanwhile, Linda thrived. Under her leadership, the company Jack had once run became stronger than ever. Linda's careful restructuring, smart financial planning, and empathetic management style earned her the admiration of employees and investors alike. Unlike Jack, she wasn't driven by ego but by a genuine desire to see the company succeed. She restored trust with clients, streamlined operations, and treated employees as partners, not tools. The once floundering firm became a model of stability and success under her care. Linda had earned her seat at the table, and the business community took notice. Articles celebrating her achievements began to circulate, praising her as a visionary leader who had saved a sinking ship. "A quiet powerhouse," one headline read. Another article referred to her as a symbol of resilience and dignity in the face of adversity. The media loved her story, a woman once underestimated, now leading a multi-million-dollar company with grace. Linda accepted the attention with modesty, her focus always on the work. Her success extended beyond the company. Invitations poured in for her to speak at conferences, mentor young professionals, and serve on advisory boards. Linda's schedule filled quickly, but she made time for herself, too. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to enjoy the life she had built. She traveled, picked up hobbies, and reconnected with old friends who had watched her transformation with admiration. Life felt balanced, fulfilling, and hers alone to savor. It was at a charity gala, 2 years after their last meeting, that Jack and Linda crossed paths once more. Jack hadn't planned to attend. He hated events like this now, they reminded him of his fall from grace. But his boss insisted he attend as a show of goodwill for the firm. Jack spent the evening lurking in corners, nursing a glass of water while mingling awkwardly with unfamiliar faces. He was a shadow of the confident man he once was. And then he saw her. Linda entered the ballroom, dressed in a simple but elegant navy gown that commanded quiet attention. Conversations seemed to pause as she walked by, her presence a striking blend of strength and grace. Jack's breath caught in his throat. He watched as people greeted her warmly, shaking her hand and praising her achievements. Linda smiled politely, gracious yet humble, the center of the room without even trying. She was everything he used to be, and more. Jack felt a sudden urge to approach her, but his feet wouldn't move. He realized he had no words, no right to speak to her after everything he had done. As the night wore on, Jack lingered on the sidelines, feeling like an outsider. Finally, as Linda prepared to leave, their eyes met briefly. Jack froze, his heart pounding. Linda held his gaze for a moment, her expression unreadable, before offering him the faintest nod, a gesture of acknowledgement, not anger. It was as if she had already moved on, and Jack was just a remnant of her past. The encounter haunted Jack in the days that followed. That brief moment of eye contact had stirred something deep within him. It wasn't anger or jealousy, no, it was shame. Jack wanted to apologize, to make amends for the years of pain he had caused her. But how could he? Words felt inadequate, and his pride, though shattered, still made him hesitant. Linda didn't need his apology. She had built a life without him, a life far more successful and fulfilling than his own. One afternoon, Jack sat down to write her a letter. He hesitated as he held the pen, unsure where to begin. "Linda," he wrote, "I don't expect you to forgive me, but I need you to know that I see it all now, everything you did for me, everything I took for granted, and everything I destroyed. I'm sorry. You were the best thing that ever happened to me, and I threw it away." He folded the letter, but something stopped him from sending it. Jack realized that Linda didn't need closure, he did. In the months that followed, Jack devoted himself to rebuilding his own life, not for anyone else, but for himself. He worked harder, treated his colleagues with respect, and learned the value of humility. He knew he would never fully escape the consequences of his mistakes, but he could choose to be a better person moving forward. Jack's pride no longer drove him, instead, it was the memory of Linda's strength that guided him. Years later, Linda sat in her office, looking out at the city skyline. Her journey had been one of resilience, growth, and quiet triumph. She thought of the sacrifices she had made and the lessons she had learned. Life had not been easy, but it had shaped her into the woman she was now, a woman of strength, dignity, and unshakable confidence. The pain of her past no longer haunted her. Instead, it had become the foundation upon which she had built her success. Linda had no regrets. Jack was a chapter in her life, one that had ended long ago. She wished him no ill will, only that he, too, had found peace. Her story was not about revenge or bitterness. It was about rising above the ashes of betrayal and proving to herself that she was enough. Linda closed her laptop and stood, ready to head home for the evening. The life she had built was hers, and hers alone, to cherish. As she stepped into the cool evening air, Linda smiled. The world had tried to underestimate her, but she had proven them wrong. Strength wasn't about shouting the loudest or being the most powerful, it was about enduring, growing, and thriving against all odds. And Linda had done just that. Jack's days were no longer filled with the glamour and prestige he once enjoyed. His mornings began quietly, with a simple cup of coffee as sunlight streamed through his small apartment window. He had adjusted to a quieter, humbler life, one where no one called him sir or catered to his whims. He now worked as an assistant manager for a small logistics company, and though it was far from his old CEO title, Jack took pride in the honest work he did. The Jack of years ago would have scoffed at his current situation, but this Jack was different. Losing everything had taught him to appreciate the small victories, a successful day at work, a kind conversation with a colleague, or the satisfaction of earning an honest paycheck. Most of all, it had taught him humility. Jack no longer saw himself as someone above others. He understood now that respect was earned through actions, not titles. Yet, no matter how far he moved forward, Linda remained in his thoughts, not out of longing, but out of respect. She had been the catalyst for his change, a reminder of his gravest mistakes and his deepest regrets. He often wondered if she thought of him at all or if he had simply become a ghost of her past. Jack never sent the letter he had written, but he kept it tucked away in a drawer as a symbol of the man he used to be, a man he promised himself he would never become again. Years had passed, and Linda's life continued to blossom. She had earned recognition as one of the most influential women in the business world, with awards lining the shelves of her bright, spacious office. Linda spent her days mentoring young leaders and guiding her company into new ventures. She had found her calling not in seeking revenge, but in building something meaningful and lasting. One sunny afternoon, Linda attended a conference focused on leadership and resilience. It was a topic she knew all too well, and she was scheduled to speak on a panel. As she waited backstage, she reviewed her notes, her focus unwavering. Just then, a voice nearby caught her attention. "Excuse me, can you point me toward the catering staff?" It was familiar, rougher than she remembered, but unmistakably Jack's. Linda froze for a moment before turning her head slightly. Jack stood a few feet away, holding a clipboard and wearing the uniform of an event coordinator. He didn't notice her, too busy organizing the details of the venue. His shoulders were less broad now, his face etched with lines of time and struggle, but there was a calmness to his expression that surprised Linda. Without saying a word, she turned back to her notes, a faint smile on her lips. Seeing Jack in such a different light confirmed what she already knew: she had won, not through vengeance, but through her resilience and growth. The conference ended successfully, with Linda's panel earning a standing ovation. As attendees mingled afterward, Jack remained at his post, clearing glasses and organizing paperwork. He glanced toward the stage just as Linda walked by, her confidence undeniable. For a fleeting moment, their eyes met again. Jack hesitated, his throat tightening. He wanted to say something, anything, but the words stuck. Linda offered him a small, polite nod, just as she had at the gala years before. It was not a gesture of pity or anger, but one of quiet acknowledgement. In that moment, Jack understood that Linda had long since moved on. She didn't need to hear his apology, and perhaps she never would. Jack took a deep breath and whispered under his breath, "Thank you, Linda." It was the closest he could come to closure, a silent gratitude for the woman who had once believed in him, even when he didn't deserve it. Jack continued his work with a new lightness in his chest. He didn't need to chase success or redemption anymore. Life had taught him hard lessons, and though he had lost nearly everything, he had found peace in starting over. He would carry Linda's strength with him, quietly honoring her as the person who had shown him the path forward, even in her absence. Linda sat by her window that evening, watching the golden hues of sunset fade into the horizon. Her days were filled with achievements and purpose, but it was these quiet moments that she cherished most. She thought of Jack briefly, not with anger, but with a sense of peace. He had been a part of her journey, a chapter that had shaped her, but not defined her. Life had given her pain, but it had also given her the strength to rise above it. Over the years, Linda learned that true victory wasn't about proving others wrong, it was about proving herself right. Her success wasn't a rebuttal to Jack's cruelty, it was a testament to her own resilience and growth. She had built a life she loved, surrounded by people who valued her for who she was. Jack's absence had not left a void but had instead made space for a stronger, better version of herself to emerge. As night fell, Linda closed her eyes and let out a soft sigh of contentment. Her life, once broken, had become whole again. The sacrifices, the pain, and the betrayals had been stepping stones to something greater. She had found happiness not in revenge, but in moving forward with dignity and grace. Somewhere out there, she hoped Jack had found peace, too. But for Linda, the past was just that, the past. Her future belonged entirely to her, and it was brighter than she had ever imagined. Linda's days were filled with purpose and fulfillment. Her company continued to thrive under her leadership, and her reputation in the business world grew stronger with each passing year. Invitations to international events, conferences, and mentorship opportunities poured in, yet Linda never let the attention change her. She remained grounded, humble, and grateful for every step that had brought her to where she was. Her private life also bloomed in quiet ways. Linda began volunteering for organizations focused on empowering women and young entrepreneurs. She found immense satisfaction in helping others avoid the struggles she had endured. Through this work, she met people who inspired her, people who, like her, had faced hardship but chose to rise above it. Each new connection reminded her of the power of perseverance and kindness, values she held close to her heart. On weekends, Linda retreated to a small house she had purchased in the countryside, a place she had always dreamed of owning. It was modest yet cozy, surrounded by wildflowers and rolling hills. There, she found peace away from the chaos of city life. She spent her days gardening, reading, and enjoying the simplicity of her surroundings. For Linda, success wasn't just about wealth or status, it was about living a life filled with balance, peace, and genuine happiness. Jack's life had settled into something manageable, though far from what he had once imagined for himself. He had found stability in his small job, earning enough to live comfortably but without the excesses of his past. Gone were the lavish dinners, the designer suits, and the fawning attention of people who had admired his fleeting success. In their place was a simpler existence, one that Jack had come to accept and even appreciate. Each day, Jack woke early, packed his lunch, and took the bus to work. He had grown used to the rhythm of his new life. The arrogance that once defined him had been replaced by humility. He no longer demanded respect, instead, he worked hard to earn it, bit by bit. The employees at his new company liked him, he was kind, patient, and generous with his time. Jack had become someone people could rely on, though few knew about the man he had once been. At times, when he was alone, Jack reflected on the choices that had led him here. Linda's face often appeared in his mind, not as a reminder of what he had lost, but as a symbol of the strength he had come to admire. She had risen where he had fallen. Jack didn't resent her for it, in fact, he felt grateful. She had shown him the way forward, even if they walked separate paths. For the first time in his life, Jack was content with being ordinary. One cold winter morning, Jack received an envelope at work. It was addressed to him, but the sender's name was unfamiliar. He opened it cautiously, pulling out a neatly folded letter and a small card. As his eyes scanned the first few lines, his breath caught in his throat. The letter wasn't from Linda, but from someone connected to her company, a foundation dedicated to supporting struggling entrepreneurs and businesses. The letter explained that Jack's story had come to their attention, and he had been selected to participate in a mentorship program designed to help people rebuild their careers. Included with the letter was an invitation to a workshop led by some of the industry's most successful leaders. At the bottom of the card was a handwritten note: "Everyone deserves a second chance. Make the most of it." Jack sat at his desk for a long time, the letter trembling in his hands. He knew immediately who was behind it: Linda. She hadn't signed her name, but the gesture bore her unmistakable mark. It wasn't pity, it was compassion. She had no reason to help him, yet she had. Jack felt his eyes sting with tears, a mix of gratitude and humility washing over him. Linda had given him a lifeline, even after everything he had done. Jack attended the workshop a week later. Surrounded by other participants, all with their own stories of struggle and loss, Jack felt an unexpected sense of belonging. For the first time in years, he shared his experiences openly, admitting his mistakes and acknowledging the arrogance that had led to his downfall. It wasn't easy, but it was liberating. The mentors spoke about resilience, growth, and the power of starting over. Jack listened intently, absorbing their words like a sponge. He realized that his past didn't have to define him. He could choose to move forward, not as the man he once was, but as someone better, someone who had learned the value of humility, hard work, and forgiveness. For the first time in years, Jack felt hopeful about his future. At the end of the workshop, Jack stayed behind to thank the organizers. As he shook hands with one of the mentors, he asked quietly, "Did Linda arrange this?" The mentor smiled knowingly but didn't answer directly. Sometimes, people believe in us even when we don't believe in ourselves. "You're here because you deserve to be." Jack nodded, understanding. Linda had given him the greatest gift of all, a second chance. Months later, Jack started his own small consulting firm, helping struggling businesses navigate challenges he now understood all too well. He worked tirelessly, drawing on his past mistakes to guide others towards success. His company wasn't flashy or groundbreaking, but it was honest, and it made a difference. Jack's clients trusted him, not because of his titles or wealth, but because he had walked the path they were on and had come out stronger. Jack no longer sought validation from the world. He didn't need accolades or applause. His satisfaction came from the quiet victories, helping a family-owned business avoid bankruptcy, mentoring a young entrepreneur through their first big decision, or simply knowing he had done something good. Each day, he carried Linda's lesson with him: strength wasn't about dominance or power, it was about resilience, compassion, and growth. One day, Jack sat at his desk, reflecting on how far he had come. He pulled out the crumpled letter he had never sent to Linda and read it one last time. Then, with a quiet smile, he tore it up and let the pieces fall into the trash. Linda didn't need his apology, and Jack no longer needed closure. He had found peace, not in erasing his past but in learning from it. He hoped, wherever Linda was, she knew how grateful he was for the role she had played in his journey. Years later, Linda sat on the porch of her countryside home, watching the sun set over the hills. The sky was painted in shades of gold and crimson, a reflection of the life she had built, one filled with warmth, purpose, and peace. She had moved beyond the pain of her past, carrying with her only the lessons it had taught her. A letter arrived that day, addressed to Linda Hayes. It was from a small consulting firm she had never heard of, thanking her for the mentorship program she had indirectly inspired. Linda smiled as she read the note, recognizing Jack's name at the bottom. He hadn't written to her directly, but his gratitude was clear. She set the letter aside and poured herself a cup of tea. Linda didn't need acknowledgement or thanks. She already had everything she needed. Her strength had carried her through the darkest times and into a life of fulfillment and meaning. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Linda closed her eyes and took a deep breath, knowing she had not only survived but thrived. Somewhere out there, Jack was walking his own path, a better man than he once was. And that, Linda thought, was the real victory, not in proving him wrong, but in showing herself just how strong she could be. The past was a distant memory, and the future was hers to embrace, one beautiful moment at a time.